Chapter 1 of Martin Luther by Carl E. Koppenhaver. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elyse J. Wood. Chapter 1 The Miner's Son. Eisleben to Erfurt. The Turk was slashing his way up the valley of the Danube into the heart of Europe. God sat far off, not as a loving father, but as a vengeful law court judge, inflicting all sorts of misery on mankind. In the forest lurked witches and demons, seeking to drag the unwary to destruction. Into such a world, threatened by the sword, ruled by fear, and plagued by superstition, Martin Luther was born on November 10th, 1483, in Eisleben, Germany. Within such a world he became a man disdainful of bodily harm, convinced of God's love and mercy, endowed with abundant common sense, a Christian worthy of study and emulation. Although his station of birth was lowly, greatness sought him out, and the whole world has felt the impact of his life. The Luther child was baptized in the Church of St. Peter the morning after his birth, and was named Martin for the saint of the day. His parents, Hans and Margaretha Luther, were simple, industrious folk. They had moved recently from the farming community of Mura, home of the Luther family, to Eisleben, where Hans hoped to make his fortune in the copper mines. When Martin was about 6 months old, the family moved to nearby Mansfeld. The first years there were hard, and it was with difficulty that Hans scraped together money to send his son to school. By the time Martin was 13, however, his father was able to send him to a school conducted by the Brothers of the Common Life at Magdeburg. As was the custom, he earned his board by singing and begging from door to door with one of the school choirs. He stayed in Magdeburg for only a year, and then was sent to the parish school of St. George in Eisenach. While again earning his keep by singing and begging, he became acquainted with Frau Ursula Cotta, a woman of culture and refinement, who took the promising young scholar into her home. Hans Luther had been working diligently, and by the time his son was 17, the family budget permitted his entrance to the University of Erfurt. Martin worked diligently too, and at the end of 4 years had passed not only his bachelor's but his master's examinations. Into the Cloister. Obedient to his father's wishes, Martin Luther, on May 20th, 1505, began his postgraduate studies at Erfurt, preparatory to entering the field of law. But after studying for only a few weeks, he suddenly rejected the whole idea and applied for admission at the town's Augustinian monastery. Hans Luther was terribly angry, and Martin's university friends were astounded. Why had he taken such a step? Many factors contributed, but in the final analysis his decision to become a monk can be summed up in the words religious experience. His parents were God-fearing people, whose piety undoubtedly had an early influence upon him. He shared fear of the horrors of hell, purgatory, and the Last Judgment, which was common to people at the close of the Middle Ages. In the university library he found a complete Bible, and was tremendously impressed with his own ignorance of its contents. He attended church and daily chapel devotions regularly all through school. His introspective nature made him starkly aware of his sins and shortcomings. Life as a monk was held to be the best way to forgiveness and heaven. Several grim incidents increased his anxiety. While on a holiday from the university, he accidentally severed an artery in his leg with his student sword. He almost bled to death, and in distress prayed to the Virgin Mary for help. The death of a number of students during a plague moved him profoundly. While returning to Erfurt, following a visit to Mansfeld, he was caught in a heavy thunderstorm, and a bolt of lightning struck so close that he was knocked to the ground. He invoked St. Anna for aid, and vowed, "Help me, and I will become a monk." 15 days later, on July 17th, friends accompanied him to the gate of the Black Cloister, monastery of the Order of Augustinian Hermits in Erfurt. That this decision came later in life than usually was the case, and that his impressionable years had been spent, not within the confines of a monastery, but in the unrestricted atmosphere of a great university, later proved valuable to him and to the Protestant Church. Monk and Priest. Luther was not received immediately into the monastery, but had to remain for several months in the monastic hostelry, examining himself and being examined. In September 1505, all parties being satisfied, his head was shaved, and he was invested with the black Augustinian habit and cowl, and formally received as a novice. He scrubbed the floors, begged in the streets, and engaged in various ascetic and spiritual exercises. When his probationary year was ended, Luther took the vows of obedience, poverty, and chastity, and was received into the order of the Augustinian monks. His sincere piety and scholarship so impressed his superiors that he was urged to prepare for the priesthood, and on April 4th, 1507, was ordained to that office. The petty employments of the monastery did not consume all of Luther's energy, and he devoted himself strenuously to studying the scholastic theology available at that time. However, long hours with books did little to ease his mind and give him the peace of conscience that he sought within the cloister walls. The books taught him to rely on his own efforts to procure favor with God, and he was too honest to believe that his penitence was deep enough and his fastings worthy enough to compensate for his sins. Although his heart was not at rest, Luther continued to perform his priestly duties and undertake any new tasks assigned to him. In the fall of 1508, he was appointed to the chair of moral philosophy, which had been entrusted to the Augustinians by the faculty at the newly established University of Wittenberg. Desiring to teach theology rather than logic and ethics, he availed himself of this opportunity to study for a bachelor's degree, which would permit him to lecture on certain books of the Bible. He had virtually completed his studies when he was called back to Erfurt in October 1509. There he lectured in the monastery for about a year, and in November 1510 was sent in company with another monk on a mission to Rome. In the Holy City he visited as many shrines and churches as possible. His high opinion of the Papal Court was lowered by his observations of its reckless luxury and scandal, but his confidence in the Church remained unshaken. End of chapter 1.